Should drivers be worried about AVs?
I would say a couple of things with drivers. I mean, I think number one is it would be dishonest to say, oh, there's nothing to see here. This is 10 years away. Don't worry about it. It does not have to be a fixed pie that where AVs takeaway
Mhm.
rides. If you're driving today and you see Waymos on the street, we still see growth in drivers, growth in driver hours, growth in frequency, new drivers coming on the platform, and you see growth in
Mhm.
Waymo. And also, we have to prepare for the future where we can't say it won't have any impact.
Jeremy Bird is the Executive Vice President of Driver Experience at Lyft, overseeing Lyft's products and experiences for the 1.4 million drivers who choose a platform every year. Bird oversees all of Lyft's supply and supply partnerships, including autonomous vehicles, fleets, livery, and their rental subsidiary, FlexDrive. He previously served as Lyft's Chief Policy Officer, leading the company's efforts around driver and AV policy, insurance regulations, social impact, ECG, and environmental policy. And he also ran President Obama's national organizing campaigns and successfully built two campaigns prior to joining Lyft. He's originally from St. Louis, and Jeremy now lives in Lafayette, California, with his wife and four young children. So I got to throw that four in there, Jeremy. But how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Congrats, by the way, on your latest addition to your family.
Thanks. Yeah, I've got three boys now, and I was just telling you, I took a little podcast hiatus, so I was sort of on and off of paternity leave, still working, but it's been fun. I don't know if I'm going to make it to your level, but if I need tips, you're the guy I'll call.
Yeah, yeah. Let me know if you're deciding on the fourth.
Awesome. Well, I'm really excited to chat with you today because, you wrote this blog post, I guess a month or two ago now that, really revolved around Lyft's vision for AV and how human drivers do or don't play into that. So I think that's going to be kind of the overarching theme of what we talk about today. But maybe you could kind of take a step back and set the sort of stage for us. Like there's a lot of buzz right now around AVs, obviously, autonomous vehicles. We just talked about it at my Herbivore conference. And, we had a Lyft executive, Stephen, speak on one of my panels at Ride AI. Talk a little bit about, what's Lyft's main focus these days right now in the world of AVs?
Yeah, thanks for the question. Yeah, I mean, it's such a unique moment we live in. And I think, depending on where you're watching this podcast from or listening to it from, it may be very sort of prevalent in your day to day. If you're living in San Francisco, you can't, I get off the BART in the morning, get on my bike, and you see Waymos on the street.
Everywhere.
Less so than where my parents live in St. Louis, where there aren't autonomous vehicles on the street. But obviously, it's a really pivotal moment. People have been talking about it for several years. Like, when will autonomous vehicles come? When will they be commercialized? When will this be real? And I think we're seeing that rapidly approaching, and with all of the speed and developments of AI, I think that the biggest thing for us is like the moment is coming. And it's really important that as a company and as a customer obsessed company that's thinking every day about our drivers and the riders on the platform, it is really important to us to have an open and honest conversation. And so what my blog post is really about is, I think we are embracing that autonomous future. We also think it's a hybrid future, meaning we think that, on our platform, there will be human driven cars like there are today. That'll continue to be incredibly important to us as a business and figuring out how do we show up in a way that really provides this economic mobility for drivers today. And then as we transition into the AV future, it's likely to start with these big fleets, but as it moves over time, we want to make sure that we are positioned to make sure drivers can also be a part of that AV future, both the hybrid part and
Mhm.
also the ownership over time. And so it's just an initial conversation around what we see the future looking like and how we can both create the best future for Lyft and for drivers and for riders on the platform.
Very cool. I mean, I think you said the moment is coming, but I guess I would push back and say the moment is here, right? I
Yeah,
mean, when I'm in
yeah.
LA and in San Francisco,
Better way to put
I've
it. Right.
I've
Yeah.
taken a Waymo, and obviously from a customer experience, a lot of people love it. I think I think one of the things that I've been covering, obviously the rideshare industry for now 11 years, and I think there was this first AV hype cycle, and a lot of drivers would ask me, about, oh, should I be worried about AVs? I think there's even a section in my book, should drivers be worried about AVs, right at the end that my editor made me put in. So thanks to him, very early. And Now with Waymos though, they're actually here, right? And so I think that's kind of the big, I guess I would say, concern. I did a sort of unscientific poll on our YouTube channel, I think with thousands of responses the other day. 30% of the drivers in our audience said that they were extremely worried about AVs. And I think a big reason is because they're seeing them, now on the streets. They're seeing articles, they're seeing people talk about it. So what would you tell, a driver who, has maybe been doing it for 30,000 trips, or maybe they're just getting into it? Like, should drivers be worried about AVs?
Yeah. So real quick, back to your point about is it coming or is it here? I think your point is exactly right. It is here in certain places. So if you're a driver in
Hmm.
LA or a driver in San Francisco or a driver in Austin, you're seeing it. If you're a driver in Detroit, maybe you haven't seen it yet, but it is here, if that
Yeah.
makes sense. So you're right on that. I would say a couple of things to drivers. I mean, I think number one is it would be dishonest to say, oh, there's nothing to see here. This is 10 years away. Don't worry about it. I think that is like the wrong approach. I think it
Hmm.
is true that as AVs come on. So the first thing I would say is it does not have to be a fixed pie that where AVs take away
Hmm.
rides, all the rides that human drivers are giving today. It should and can grow the pie. And I think that, I really believe that. And we've seen that in San Francisco, where if you're driving today and you see Waymos on the street, we still see growth in drivers, growth in driver hours, growth in frequency, new drivers coming on the platform, and you see growth in Waymo. And you see that in some other markets as well. And I do think that as a rideshare industry, we can grow the pie as AVs come on.
Hmm.
And one of the things, for drivers out there, one of the rides you hate the most is the short in-city ride.
Hmm.
There are ways in which AVs can add to the overall ecosystem on the rideshare side and just transportation networks in a city in general. And so that would be the first thing I would say. And also, we have to prepare for the future where we can't say it won't have any impact.
So you mentioned San Francisco, that you're seeing a growth in drivers and driver hours. Are there specifics around that, or can you kind of, maybe double click on that? It sounds like, obviously, I mean, I just was in San Francisco. I mean, there's got to be hundreds of Waymos. I was at a stoplight and there's four in a row. So, I think just counting them, you
Yeah.
can tell there's at least, 1 to 300 would be my guess, if not more, around the city. And obviously they're doing a lot of rides, and Lyft is also there. So are you seeing, I guess talk a little bit about the growth you're seeing in San Francisco, for example?
Yeah, I mean, I think what my main point is like whether it's Phoenix or LA or San Francisco is what you just said, where you're seeing a lot of autonomous vehicles
Hmm.
and you're also seeing we're seeing growth in terms of drivers. We're not seeing like a massive downturn in those places in terms of driver hours or earnings potential. We are seeing a growth overall in terms of the number of people that are going to a rideshare
Hmm.
network to get rides. I think, the question is over time, as AV technology improves and it can do more things, go to the airport, go on the highway,
Hmm.
go across the bridge. The question is, what impact does that have? We don't know, to be honest, right? We're looking at that data constantly, and our focus is how do we make sure as that's happening, we are doing two things. One is continuing to grow the pie, continuing to talk about how just overall we get to a place where fewer and fewer people need their own cars, where more and more people are
Hmm.
relying on the platform where there's more integration on the Lyft network, which will be ultimately good for drivers. At the same time, we need to be doing two other things. One is preparing for the long term. Today, all AVs are really in these sort of like fleets, big, huge fleets.
Hmm.
They're out of price range for most individuals, and it's not possible to buy an AV and
Yeah.
put it in the garage. I do believe over time that will happen. I think that's really important to, I think it feels like just like
Hmm.
AVs maybe someday felt like they were never going to be
Yeah.
here. It does feel like that, but I believe that will happen. And so we've got to figure out how do we make that possible for
Yeah.
drivers in the future, whether you're an entrepreneur that wants to own several of them as a driver or a driver that wants to have one.
Yeah.
And also, we need to be focused on economic mobility, which means we've been focused on this in a lot of ways, which is if there is any movement of some of the pie grows, but it also has an impact on drivers. How do we make sure we're showing up? We think about the drivers who come to the Lyft platform as entrepreneurs that are running their own business, and their goal in life is to be successful, whether that's providing for their children so that they can go to the right college or making sure that they're able to go on that special trip and it's just something they're doing 10 hours a week or 5 hours a week or something they're doing full time. We want to show up for drivers in a really holistic way and make sure there are opportunities for drivers both on and off the platform.
Got it. Well, and I mean, I think that, I guess, do you kind of agree with that sentiment? We did this poll and I'm sure you've talked to drivers. Do you think, about that number of 30% of drivers, from the ones you're talking about? Like, does that come up a lot? I mean, like 30% extremely worried, like seems like a lot to me, for relative to how, like you said, Waymo is only in a few markets, right? And doing a small percentage of rides. But I like that response, that, hey, the industry is still growing, right? Like, obviously, there are these worries. If 30% of drivers are extremely worried, I think that's a valid concern, but the industry is still growing. And, I guess maybe the part two of your answer is, Lyft isn't forgetting about drivers. We're also going to be investing in them along the way.
Yeah, yeah, I think you're right. So we've done a lot of listening. I mean, it's like I think as somebody who runs the driver experience work here, the number one thing we can do is listen and not just send out one survey that you listen, but like listen, get in the car every time I
Hmm.
get in a lift. I'm asking, the driver, like, how are you thinking about this? And it is different based on what market you're in. But yeah, we're listening to drivers on this. I sent out an email to drivers a while back, like we want to know where, and it's varied, right? Some folks are very worried, just see it as like a zero sum game. Some folks are like, well, this isn't in my area. It's something I'm not going to worry about. It's too far off. And others look at it and say, hey, I'm an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
How do I think about this? How do I not make this a zero
I
sum
mean,
game?
to be fair, I think 40% of the drivers in that poll said they were not worried at all. So, you had
Right.
even more that were
Yeah.
not worried, but obviously some were.
Yeah. No, that's totally right.
Okay, cool. So, I mean, I think that, obviously with, drivers seeing, these vehicles on the road, I mean, I guess one thing that kind of stands out, like, where do you think of Lyft in this? Because, I mean, I guess Waymos right now are not on the Lyft platform that you can call a Waymo on Uber. You can call, a Waymo on their own app. Like, how do you see Lyft fitting into this, I guess, in the future, but also right now? Like, I guess to put it bluntly, like, how come I can't call a Waymo on a Lyft right now?
Yeah, I mean that's where we're as in this summer in Atlanta, you'll be able to call a May Mobility AV on the Lyft platform, and our hope is to continue to partner with everyone out there that's developing safe,
Mhm.
AV technology. It will come on the platform, and we're very open about that to drivers. And as we're going into new markets, we'll both have conversations with drivers in those markets and also riders in those markets. There's a couple of things that you still have to think about in this industry, right? Some riders are not comfortable at all getting into an AV, and that's fine, right? We will educate folks, we'll give them the opportunity, the option on the rider side. And then, what we'll do is just work in each of the markets where it becomes available to try to do it in a way that's, the most beneficial to, every customer that whether it's a driver or rider. I think the one, main thing we're thinking about as we roll this out is just being, just having that conversation, right? About one of the other things that, a lot of drivers will there are many rides where a human driving it will be better. If I'm going to the
Mhm.
airport and getting your luggage in and out, if I'm new to a city, having the conversation with the driver about all the great things
Yeah.
about that city, it does raise our service, expectations, I think, for folks, like consistency. When you get in an AV today, it's very consistent what experience you're going to get. So I do think there are ways to talk about kind of up leveling the service and making sure that human drivers are seen as a feature in many ways or
Mhm.
on specific rides, not a bug.
Yeah, I think that's a good point that there, what are some of those rides or categories that you think humans will do better than AVs? I think airport and luggage is kind of the most obvious. And then I guess how might you see that manifesting itself as a product or as an experience? Customers will have the option to have human or AV, or how do you see that sort of actually playing out in real life too?
Yeah, I think from the customer rider side, we'll want to give people optionality, and I think a lot of folks will, people are different, right? Some people
Hmm.
will always want a human driven car. That's just they feel good about it. And you go into the
Hmm.
grocery store, you go to the self checkout, you go to the checkout with the clerk.
Yeah.
Like some people have a specific preference. Some people will like to do one and the other based on the ride, right? They're feeling really tired and they don't want to have interaction. They want to go in an AV. They're feeling they're going out and they really want they're being social. They might switch on and off. So we want to
Hmm.
give people that option. I think some people will set it as like I only want this option kind of always. And then some will say, hey, yeah, no, I'm good for both. Or right now I want to choose that option versus the other. So we really do want to make it something just like we do today with modes, right? Where
Yeah.
sometimes I want a luxury car, sometimes I want to wait and save because I don't want to spend that much and I don't have a time pressure.
Well, I think there's also this interesting opportunity for drivers. You mentioned, short rides. Drivers typically don't like short rides, unless they're on some kind of weekly ride challenge where, they want to rack up a bunch of short rides to get a bonus, which, aren't around these days as much as they used to be in the past. But what are some good examples of rides that, drivers kind of like where maybe AVs don't do as well? There's airport rides. There's also, like short rides, minimum fares, I guess rides where like I have to wait a long time or, anything like I think there's like this interesting opportunity to kind of like give the rides that human drivers don't like to AVs and that they might be a good fit for. And maybe it's not perfect, but like I don't know if you're thinking about any of that, or you can kind of share some examples to, maybe get human drivers excited that like, hey, we don't have to do these types of trips anymore.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what we do need to figure out is, we look at acceptance rate, right? How likely are drivers to accept a ride, and what are the rides that have sort of the lowest? And it might be short rides in a city, it might be specific destinations. Obviously, right now there are limitations to where an AV
Mhm.
can go. So obviously, you want human drivers on those, rides that are on the highway are longer, but that will sort of change over time. There are
I
certain
guess
rides
that's actually a good metric to look at. Yeah, what are the rides or the, kind of groupings of rides that have the lowest acceptance rate? And then sort of seeing, okay, maybe drivers don't want to drive, from the city all the way out to, East Bay or, South because they might not get a return trip. And I mean, I guess that's one that maybe I wouldn't want as a driver, but I don't know if an AV would want that either because they can't get a, a
Yeah,
return
no, I
back,
mean,
right?
we'll have a, focus just like we do with our, making sure the utilization is high on
Hmm.
on the AVs. So we'll have to balance that. I mean, that's part of what we did last year with drivers around the sort of making sure we were incentivizing those rides that go far away and might not have a return. So you're going to pay more for that in order to
Hmm.
do that. Or if you have a long, traffic, how do we make sure we pay more for that? But you're right, exactly. Like you're going to want to make sure that you're utilizing the AVs as well. So but I think there's a balance we can figure out there. And also, again, hopefully one thing it will do is if you have more supply, you're going to
Hmm.
have faster ETAs, you're going to have a better experience, and hopefully that will lead to more conversion, meaning riders who are coming on and checking it, which leads to more riders overall, which makes the platform better. Like it is a scale game and a
Yeah.
density game. So the more we can do that, the more people realize, look, when I go out in the city, I don't need to drive my own car and pay for parking. When I
Hmm.
commute, I don't need to drive my own car and pay for parking. And I think the more we can sort of get that density, those ETAs even faster, it could be just beneficial for every
Yeah.
rider.
Well, so I think that, definitely sounds like industry is currently growing. There's a lot of potential to grow too. If people ditch their cars or, the experience is great and they're taking more rides. But I guess like what are your thoughts on, I mean, the whole point of AVs though, isn't it to be cheaper, than a human driver? So isn't it kind of competition with a human driver? Like, do you see, if over a medium to long term, shouldn't AVs kind of come? What are your thoughts on this sort of theory where AVs take, the baseline demand in San Francisco, for example, right? There's whatever, 100,000 rides a week or a day. And, you know that there's going to be 100,000. So let's get enough AVs to fill that. And then maybe human drivers come in during prime time or, when things are going up and down. And so you have that flexibility. Like, I guess I sort of see that there's going to be less opportunity, bit more opportunity overall, but less for human drivers in the future if like the whole promise of AVs works out, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think the question there is timeline and
Hmm.
how fast that goes and how fast the sort of mass scale production of AVs happen. So I do want to spend, let's just be a minute there. We can come back. I'm not avoiding your question. I'll come back to it. But I do think long game, long state. Today you can buy cars what they call L2, L3, right? When you buy a
Hmm.
nicer car, it's going to have some of that technology that'll, make sure you don't swerve out of the lane or,
Keep you
really
from
tell you
hitting the
what,
car in front of
yeah,
you.
not to hit the car in front of you, all these things, right? That's going to ultimately lead to L4 technology where you will be able to purchase a vehicle from an OEM, from a manufacturer that has self-driving technology in it. And it should roll off the lot lift ready. Meaning
Hmm.
when you with and you think about there's a bunch of financing you could do here. So when you get the price low enough that people can buy AVs,
Hmm.
should be able to own an AV in your garage. And then think about what that changes. I mean, how much flexibility and freedom and how much, when we look at all the reasons that drivers drive, it's I would
Hmm.
drive because I want to be able to show up at my son's soccer game. I want to be able to go to the concert. I want to be able to be an entrepreneur and try this sort of thing out. I want to get the extra 10 hours because I'm only getting 29 hours at the grocery store. Like all these different reasons. If you have an AV that you can come on, I mean, what is it that you do as a driver today, right? You have your asset, which is your car, and you
Hmm.
have your other asset, which is your time. Imagine if you can get a lot of that time back and
Yeah.
put your asset on the platform. I do believe that will, when that we get to that democratization point, there's so many opportunities for drivers.
Yeah.
And the drivers who are really doing this full time and are, you talk to all of them so much in your network of folks who are entrepreneurs who think about this as, their
Hmm.
own small business, which is, how I think about it. There's a huge amount of opportunity there.
I,
I
I
do know that that is far away or like
Yeah.
feels far
Well,
away.
I think that would be probably my biggest, kind of skepticism or criticism that I think you might be onto something, but I feel like that's very far in the future. I think in the more immediate, I mean, I think what's challenging for a lot of drivers is that it is tough to invest in your business. It sort of sounds great in theory, like, oh, you come out, you drive, you save $5 a day or, $50 a week, but it's hard to save, literally a lot of drivers drive, until they hit their goals and then they pay for the things they need and then they're done, right? It's like tough to do an 8, 12-hour shift. You don't want to drive more even though you might have the option, right? And so I think that I'm curious, what do you think there are opportunities to help, I guess more like drivers transition now, right? Like I know there's some AV services out there that are kind of doing like retrofit. Like I've got a Toyota Camry right now. Let's make this car AV so that I can put it. Like I think that is something that, hey, maybe that's actually doable. And then Lyft helps, maybe finance. I'm kind of skeptical, unfortunately skeptical though, that drivers will be able to, invest or buy an AV of their own and, be able to compete with like a fleet owner who's doing it, 1,000 or 5,000. Because we don't really see that today where, like if you look at maybe a comparative industry, Airbnb, like it started off like, oh, you rent out a room, and now it's just, a bunch of people that have a bunch of, like, networks of houses, and it's kind of gravitated towards these like, more well-off fleet owners, which honestly, unfortunately isn't, the driver population as much.
Yeah, I think it's fair skepticism. I am very committed to this, though. And I believe if you see things like this, just sort of like rampant growth of AI, which is going to bring down the price and the cost,
Hmm.
and there's so much competition in the market where, folks are going to be putting AV stacks, on cars, and I think it's going to become something that becomes very common, especially as the regulation unfolds, et
Yeah.
cetera. Where I do think that's possible. It's fair to be skeptical about it. I think the skepticism I have is just not even skepticism. The question I have is how fast
Yeah.
we can speed that up because I do
Well,
believe.
I guess that's one area where if I'm a driver, that might excite me. If Lyft is investing or partnering with, companies who are, can put an AV stack on an existing car. I know you guys have announced some partnerships on the AV side, May Mobility, I think a couple others that sounded like big companies. But if I'm a driver, when I put my driver hat on, I'm like, who are these guys? I'm sure they're big and important, but, to a driver, it's sort of like, I don't know, what can they do for me now? Versus, I think some of the, I'm not an expert in these like AV stacks and retrofits, but I feel like I've seen some cool videos, and I guess that would, maybe excite me as a driver, and actually I think be maybe a viable path. And, I don't know, 1 year, 3 years, 5 years, there's obviously the Teslas that have this, quote unquote full self-driving that, I wouldn't sit in the back seat just yet, but it is pretty cool, how well they can navigate around the city. So, and obviously, there are quite a few drivers, I'm sure Lyft drivers right now that have a Tesla on the Lyft platform. So some road, maybe put those on if or when they get like a true full self-driving.
That's right. That's right. And just think a couple of things you just said about like May Mobility, for example, as people are thinking about this, their technology is sitting in the one we'll roll out in Atlanta is in a Toyota Sienna, right?
Hmm.
So this is not a car that you haven't heard of. This is not, a
Yeah.
lot of drivers have this car
I was about to say, I think there are some Toyota Siennas on the Lyft
on
platform.
the platform for sure, for sure. And I got my Pacifica, right? And I can think about,
Yeah.
as you talked about earlier with 4 kids, you got to have the minivan. So, that's sitting, on a car that you recognize. Obviously, the Waymo's on the Jaguar, which but it's a car that people know, and I think you'll see, kind of more of that versus like a purpose built, like where Zoox is going, where it is,
Hmm.
the car built for autonomous, specifically. And I think you'll see a lot of different iterations as we get there. So I do think when you look at May Mobility, which is a smaller company, but there's only three companies that have ever had commercial vehicles on the road
Hmm.
in the United States: Waymo, Cruise, and May Mobility. I think you'll see, as it becomes more and more common to have other cars both across the world and in the United
Got
States
it.
with AV tech stack on it, it becomes more of a reality.
Well, I guess that's maybe a good thing to highlight with drivers. You're partnering with a company like May Mobility, and their tech is on a minivan right now, and so obviously there's the option, or it's going to be a lot easier for them to port that technology onto a Toyota Camry or other vehicles, and like you said, a Zoox that's building, I think kind of a bread box, and they've got the AV stack on the four corners, right? Like it's going to be a lot harder, maybe impossible to translate that onto a regular car. So I guess there's probably some opportunities there.
Yeah, and then the other thing we have to do is like, we've been thinking we've thought about this a lot, and there's about the policy angle to this and a general kind of financing angle to this. It's kind of, if you think about EVs, for example,
Hmm.
a lot of states have really invested in, programs, and we've been invested in how do we push for programs that will like allow drivers to have access to EVs at a price point that makes sense to them, right? And the whole question is how do you get that price point down so that it's not such a huge leap? And then so we will be doing everything we can to think about the financing side of it, the sort of
Yeah.
if you, can we come up with a program where you can get this and then, somehow finance it in a way that makes it affordable? That is huge and it really important to us to be thinking about because that's how you actually get to that transition.
Yeah. So I guess, the number one topic on drivers' mind is always, how much money am I going to make? Do you think that are Lyft drivers going to earn less money because of AVs as they get rolled out onto the network and platforms?
I don't think overall you'll make less money because I think I think you'll be able to utilize the asset more, right? I mean, you right now you can only do it when you have your timer to your point. Like if you kind of stop when you hit your goals, you
Well,
can
I
keep.
guess in the short term, it's more I'm kind of competing, right? Like I think there's this little bit of attention for human drivers and, really any kind of addition, whether it's other human drivers. Like I, as an individual driver, I kind of want as few drivers on the road as possible. I want high prime time, I want the rides right next to me. And Lyft doesn't always want that, right? Or doesn't want that, right? They kind of want a nice balanced marketplace. So I guess like are Lyft drivers going to earn less money, when May Mobility and, fleets of Waymos or other AVs are on the Lyft platform?
Yeah, I think it's a really good like overall conversation about earnings because ultimately I think you as a driver you want more demand, right? You want
Hmm.
more riders. If you have more riders, you're going to make more money. And so if you have fewer drivers and you have riders who are coming in, they're not converting, they're finding another way, right? They're basically getting out of the industry. They're going to go
Yeah.
drive to the airport and that's going to become their habit. They're going to, find some other way to get there. They're going to buy another car. And so ultimately you want a balance, right? So you don't want too many
Yeah.
drivers where you don't have enough demand, but you want to be able
Right.
to really drive demand to the platform and you want to be utilized, right? Like you want to be able to get a ride whenever you want, not
Hmm.
have to wait where maybe you get like a really lucrative ride, but you have to wait. You don't want that. You want to have like a constant flow of rides. So I think the stronger the market is on the demand side, the better
Hmm.
it is for drivers. But obviously there's a balance. You can flip to the other side where there's too many. And then it's really our job to really be focused on how do we think about if the service levels are high and drivers are doing a great job and making it a great experience for riders who are coming into their business, and we can just drive more and more demand to the platform, right?
Hmm.
And we get to the right place. So it's a little bit of both. So I think it's really important that as we get more supply, right, through AVs, that demand is also increasing. And that'll happen if the service levels are going up and people really realize this is a way, I don't need a car.
Yeah.
Getting on the network is a way to get around in all of my experiences, not just, to go out, not just for that one commute, but for the everyday commute.
Yeah, so I mean, I think this is the theory, right? That in the rideshare flywheel, the more demand is more ride, or more supply, more demand, and sort of this nice virtuous loop. But I feel like it's kind of counterintuitive for me, as a driver, for drivers. Like, I guess, like, I don't know. Do you think drivers buy that? Do you think that, like, I don't know, like to me, it's like, oh, I see another guy out there and he's taking my ride. Like, I don't know. That's kind of like what it seems like to me. But you're telling me that that's not the case. Like,
Yeah,
how
I
do we?
think
How do you convince it? Do you think drivers kind of buy that? And if not, how do you convince them that this is the case?
Yeah, it depends. I think it really does depend, right? It's a balance. I think there's all sorts of people coming into the platform to drive. Some people are doing it
Hmm.
all the time. It is their primary source of income versus somebody who's coming on just during busy hours, just 10 hours a week, just
Yeah.
5 hours a week, or like in between jobs, et cetera. So I think it does depend. And I'm not going to convince folks to believe something that they don't believe. I do think the more and more we can drive like we're barely touching the surface. We're barely
Hmm.
touching the surface of personal vehicle miles driven, like barely. Uber and Lyft, like all the whole ride range is just barely touching the surface. And I think there's just so much more room to grow. There should be nobody driving to the airport. Like, why drive to the airport in San Francisco? Park your car, like long-term
Yeah.
parking, so far away, get on the shuttle, like, on the train, go all the way over, take all your bags. Like doing that with four kids is a nightmare. Like,
Yeah.
so I think as we should be growing the industry, and as we grow the industry, there's more demand. Drivers will overall make more
Got
money
it.
overall. They it will feel it does feel like, oh, there's another driver there taking my ride, but I don't think it really is that way. And I think the community of folks, if you're looking at kind of overall long-term
Okay.
earnings, it's really about driving demand as much as anything.
Got it. So I think I know the answer to this question, but this summer, May Mobility coming on a Lyft platform as AVs come on the Lyft platform. Do you think driving for Lyft, in your view, is going to get better, worse, or the same?
I think initially it will stay the same. Hopefully, it'll get
Hmm.
better overall, just because we're trying to do things that are making it better overall. And we've seen a couple of things. I came over into the driver experience org about a year and a half ago,
Hmm.
and we brought in our new CEO around then, about 2 years in, and he's been focused since the day he came in on customer obsession, really
Yeah.
focusing on drivers. And I think you've seen a lot of really positive things coming out. We've seen a couple of things recently that I'm
I
really
think
proud.
he seems to do a lot of driving. I always see him
He
out
does
there
a
in his
lot of driving
Tesla.
actually, and I need to do more of it. It's actually a big commitment. Now I'm making it on a podcast, not just in my weekly report where I was like, I'm going to drive more. And Sergio's always giving me a hard time about this. I've started to drive, but I want to drive more. But yeah, he drives a lot, and when he comes back, he sends my product team a
Hmm.
list of things. It says like, this could be better for the driver
Yeah.
experience. We have to do better at this, and I think he's really pushing us to that operational excellence in great ways. The Well, we've seen a couple of things that I'm really proud of. One, we have the highest frequency we've had ever, meaning the number of hours drivers are coming, which means they're staying there. It's a good experience, right? They're
Hmm.
coming back for, it's not new drivers, it's drivers who are there more hours on the platform. Two, we have the highest driver retention we've ever had. And that means folks who are coming are staying, which is a sign. And then we have the largest gap for people that are driving on both apps. We have the largest gap in preference we've ever seen. So I think, and all this is happening through a bunch of different things I think we've put in place that are driver focused, driver centric. And the idea is like, if folks are driving on the platform or having a great experience, that's
Hmm.
what drives more demand. That's what drives profitable growth overall. And so we want to keep doing that, whether there's AVs on the platform or not. So your
Well, I
experience
guess, yeah. So
should be
what are some
better.
of those
Yeah.
specific things that you think, are leading to, higher frequency and retention? Like what do drivers love, about Lyft, like from a product or, sort of
Yeah.
what's out there?
Yeah, no, totally, candid with you. Like we have a lot more to do to get better.
Hmm.
So just preface with all this with that. But we started with the earnings commitment, which is to say, like, fairness and transparency in
Yeah.
earnings is so critical to folks. Like we shouldn't be hiding anything. We want people to know exactly what, insurance costs are, what third party costs are, what they're making. We're not taking more, and it's a commitment. And people see that when we don't hit it, we pay the
This
difference.
is what I
The
interviewed
earnings.
David about, the 70%
Yeah.
after outside expenses and insurance and things like that, that Lyft is guaranteeing, after over a week long period.
Yeah, yeah, and I think we've been doing a bunch of things like that that are around, fairness and transparency,
Hmm.
and then we've been really focused on, what the things we talked about earlier. When you looked at surveys of drivers, they were saying, some of the things I don't like. One, traffic, right? I thought I was going to get the ride was going to be X, it became longer, and I didn't
Yeah.
get paid, so we changed that. It's destination aware, meaning if I'm going to a place where I'm not gonna, get picked up, from going to that golf course far away
Hmm.
in Vegas, and I'm not going to get picked up.
Yeah.
Like, how do I make sure that I get paid for that fairly? So a bunch of those different things that were sort of answering, pain points that drivers had. And then in addition to that, I think we have been focused on the driver holistically. So what are folks trying to do overall? So we talked a little bit about this with your folks, but thinking about, why are you coming to the platform? Some folks are coming to the platform in between jobs, or it's something
Hmm.
that they're looking as a stepping point into something else. So we rolled out the driver accomplishment letter, which a lot of people have been asking for. How do I, use my experience being a great driver as something I can use for my next job in my
Yeah.
career?
Yeah,
And
I
so,
think that was a
things like
very
that.
cool product. I think we actually just published a video on it. And, to be honest, it wasn't the most popular video we've done in the past month. But I do think, if you look at the comments and some of the feedback we've gotten, from the people that, it's sort of, I like some of those products because it matters to less percent of drivers overall, like that maybe in between or, want to transition to a new career is maybe a smaller slice. But for the people that could use it, it's very impactful, right? Like I think I saw a few people email me about it and said, like, oh, I wish I would have had this when I was applying to my last apartment or job, or I think the kind of feedback on some of that stuff is very meaningful. So I think some of that, kind of like you, I like that word holistic, right, where it's like benefits, in other ways, right, or has a like kind of outsized impact. I think is cool too.
Yeah, and I think we're, a lot of those things, let's take another example. So we partnered with Merit America, which is a nonprofit
Hmm.
that does, training for a lot of different folks in the service industry. And, we opened it up and thousands of drivers applied for this like training program. And many of them have already gone through it and now are transitioned into tech jobs. And, so I was just really trying to think about this from the perspective of drivers and how do you build the greatest platform? Because if it's a good experience, you come on our platform, people will come more. They'll tell other folks to come, and then you have a better experience for the customers who are coming as riders because they're going to get picked up faster. We are picking up faster than our competitors now, and that's not easy to do as a smaller player. And so if we can provide better service and have better experience for riders, they'll keep coming back. Drivers will make more. It'll be better for Lyft and it'll be better for
Yeah.
riders.
Well, I think you mentioned a couple times, you're picking up faster and you've got higher frequency. I mean, doesn't that kind of go against your, rideshare flywheel theory, right? Because Uber does have more demand, right, from a market share perspective. So shouldn't they have better numbers in some of those categories that you mentioned?
Should.
So why don't
We're
they?
we're growing, and I think we're going to continue to grow. And I think most important is when you just think about our platform and what we can do to create the stickiest sort of reason that people want to come back as drivers, and instead of looking between both, like just come, and this will be a place where you'll have a great experience. And same thing for riders. We want to create more loyalty amongst riders. So instead of opening both apps and checking prices, know that they're going to have a better experience on the Lyft platform, and that's our goal.
Very cool. Yeah, no, I think that all sounds great. And I think really one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on an interview was because I kind of wanted to give you guys some credit for, this blog post where, I think you were, really the first company to start talking about like, hey, kind of obvious, okay, AVs are here, Waymos are here. Like I feel like a lot of times companies try to like sweep things under the rug. Like, during COVID, like gas prices were spiking up and everyone, all the companies were like, oh, just yeah, ignore that, even though drivers are having to pay double, triple, right? It's like some of these things are real costs, real worries. And so, I think it's, commendable that you guys, at least took this first step and kind of started the discussion. Like you say, you don't have all the answers, but hey, AVs are here, they're coming to the Lyft platform in the summer with May Mobility, and some drivers are worried, some aren't, and how can we kind of handle that transition best and see what's going forward.
Yeah, I think this sort of like, hey, don't worry about it. It's 10 years down the road. It's just it's just not authentic with where people are. And I think you're right in saying we don't have all the answers. We are very open and we're going to be very honest with drivers. We're going to be in dialogue with drivers about this and we want drivers to thrive on the
Yeah,
platform. Like
well, and I mean, I think from what you said too, my takeaways as a driver is okay, number one, the overall pie, the market is growing. So I think that's one good thing for someone that's looking or,
yeah,
currently in the industry. I guess the other thing that we didn't really quite talk about, I mean, Waymos are still a very small percent, of the overall rides, I guess, like they're only in a few markets. And even within those markets, I think, there was this big stat last week that Waymo's 20% of the rides, of Uber rides in Austin. But if you look at the whole metro, it's only 6%, right? So there's a lot of places they can't go and can't do. So, I mean, I guess those are the two kind of things that, like, yeah, they're here and they're growing, but they're a pretty small amount. They're pretty expensive too, right? So it's like you said, it's going to take some time to scale up this fleet too.
yeah, yeah. And I think it will scale. And I think it's all about growing the pie overall. And I would say the only other thing I would, say to drivers I maybe didn't talk about enough is
Hmm.
I do think if you're running your business, right, and you're looking at it out there, and I think it's there is going to be so many, there's going to be so many opportunities in the future, and there are opportunities right now. And I think it's providing a great experience when drivers get in the vehicle is going to be really good for folks to saying, I do want to have that human interaction and maybe I'll, kind of go back and forth, but I think we can grow the pie. I really do think we can grow significantly. We're only touching the surface on that. But at the same time, we got to be honest about it and not say, look the other way. It's not here. It is here. And we gotta focus on that.
All right. Well, I have a good idea for your next blog post. We'll put some numbers
All right.
down to growing the
Sure.
pie, some earnings, some stats around the market share, because I think that would be compelling, right? It's one thing to obviously hear, you talk about it, but as you guys get some data and
Yeah.
launch some things, I think that's like, hey, here's what we're tracking. Like here is the pie, here is, the driver earnings or whatever the numbers you think would kind of resonate with drivers. I think that would be, sort of like, all right, we're at the beginning. Now we're kind of moving things along and now we're putting our money where our mouth is, right? And actually like, kind of proving to you that, these things that I've been saying are happening are now happening.
Yeah. Yeah. I think as we get more data, we'll be happy to do that. That's a good idea.
All right. Well, send me an early draft. I might even edit it for you for free. Really appreciate you coming on, Jeremy. And where can folks learn more, obviously, about Lyft or, what you're up to, whether it's on the AV or, all the products we mentioned? What's a good spot for them to go?
Oh, interesting. I mean, obviously, you can go to our blog on lyft.com. You can also check out David on LinkedIn. He's always posting there or on X and other places, and I will do the same. We'll make
All
sure we
right.
get our blog, constantly on what we're doing, both, for drivers and also, putting out there some of those things we're doing. The one thing that I failed to mention that we will be pushing out to drivers pretty soon is, some of the things we're doing around simplifying and making our rewards program something that is just much more beneficial for every ride that a driver
Mm-hmm.
gets. This comes from like conversations I've had with a lot of drivers who say, look, I drove, what's the difference between driving 1,000 rides and 14,000 rides?
Yeah.
And we want to make sure every ride and every dollar a driver earns is benefiting them. So we're rolling out a really pretty exciting rewards program. So we'll be sending more info on that on the blog and other things as well.
Cool. And what's the gist of that? They'll be paid more per ride, or what is
It'll be
the
like
what's the reward?
basically you'll earn points per ride. And
Okay.
so per dollar earned that you can either cash back or a bunch of things we're working on partners with oil change, car wash. We're about to roll out cash back for gas, which will be some of the
Okay.
best in the industry.
Are
And
longer rides better, worth the same as short rides, or
well, it'll be better
what?
because it'll be by dollar earned. So the
Okay.
more you earn, the more points you get, and the more points you get, the more you'll be able to redeem those. And the goal is like we want, like I said earlier, we want folks to be coming to the platform and for every ride to be meaningful, every
Yeah.
ride to be worth it, and to be
Well, I
rewarding them.
think I like that because I think there's always been this, sort of the more trips you do and the higher rating you have, maybe not much benefit. If I have 30,000 rides, and a five-star rating versus 1,000 rides, I think I get paid the same, right?
Well, and
On
yeah,
a
you get to the status level, right? And like we have these,
yeah,
different tiers, but then okay, but so I'm there, but what's more? And this is really the answer to that to say, yeah, every ride, it's kind of like when I fly with United. All right, I got to a certain level. Okay, every
yeah.
time I fly, it's worth more, right? But every it's different, obviously. Every ride I give and every effort I put in will ultimately be more rewarding.
Cool. Well, Jeremy, really appreciate you coming on. I'm sure we'll be covering that Lyft Rewards program in detail over on the Rideshare Guy, and I look forward to hearing what Lyft is up to for drivers and in the AV space going forward. Thank you.
Harry, thank you. Take care.